Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such an amazing place to live, work, and play. Hope you're having a great day. You know, I often talk about sort of the pre-Katrina and the post-Katrina world because, frankly, if you think about coastal Mississippi and the opportunities that we've seized and the work that we've done to come together as a set of communities, the belief that we have and the understanding that we have around what the word resiliency means and the ability to bounce back and all the disasters that we've felt, and my strong belief that when the going gets tough, coastal Mississippi comes together and helps. We help our neighbors and we care deeply about one another, and it's the thing that's in the heart and soul of Mississippians in general, but certainly coastal Mississippians. This sense that the people are the reason why people like to come here. The people are our competitive advantage. That's why I often said and have said that people don't. That buildings don't make a community, the people make a community. And I really believe it. And I think after Katrina, we really got an opportunity to really understand that. Listen, in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, you know this, I had the opportunity to work closely with Governor Haley Barbour. We had a meeting at the Sun Herald a week after Katrina. Katrina hits on a Sunday, Monday. On the following Sunday at 3 o'clock, I hosted a meeting at the Sun Herald, and we had some community leaders there. And we met with the governor and talked about forming the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal. And the story is a hell of a story about how every aspect, governmental, non-governmental, volunteer leaders, I was just a volunteer leader, came together to formulate a plan to help coastal Mississippi really begin to understand, first of all, what do we need to do to sort of rebuild and get the infrastructure back where we can live again? And the other is what's possible in the future? Where can we go and what's possible with that? And it was really important, this planning that we did. We all got educated about what it means to build a great community, but we also were feeding the information that we were gathering to Governor Barbour. He details this in his book. He almost like led a double life. He had the life that was happening in Mississippi in the Katrina recovery mode, working with us who were involved in that. And then he had another life in Washington where he was trying to align Washington leadership around the needs of coastal Mississippi. It's an amazing feat of leadership, and it's detailed in Haley Barbour's book about Katrina that I had the real honor of writing the foreword to. Well, anyway, during that process, the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, as we formed the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal, I got to know a guy named Henry Barbour, who you may have heard his name before. He's Governor Barbour's nephew. He is a partner in Capital Resources. And he became the executive director for the commission, the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal. And we got to work super closely. I was a vice chairman of the effort, responsible for tourism and on the executive committee. So we actually formulated this group as a group that was privately financed. No government money came into this group. And it was really important to Governor Barbour that we do that. We were able to move a lot faster, and the funds that we used to hold meetings, to involve architects and planners, were all private funds, and that was important to all of us. But in the opportunity, I got to know Henry Barbour, who now is one of the most influential people in Mississippi, maybe even in the nation. Henry lives in Jackson, but he's a longtime leader in this state. He knows a lot about politics, and I've invited him on to Coast Vue to spend some time with me today. Just talking. I want to get to know Henry even better, and we'll reflect a bit on Katrina. We'll reflect a little bit on his career. I'm curious about his thoughts about what's happening in the Republican Party these days. There's a lot to talk about. But anyway, welcome to Coast Vue, my friend Henry.
Ricky, hey man, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I'm sorry for the circumstances that led us to get to know each other, because it was a devastating time. But I really am thankful for it, and I'm thankful for the deeper appreciation that I have for the coast because of the time that I spent down there in 2005, post Katrina, getting to know people and just seeing, what we're sort of seeing out of the Ukrainian people right now. Man, these coast people are tough.
Yeah.
And y'all had to live it. Yeah. It wasn't talk. And so for a Delta boy who actually lives in Yazoo City, not Jackson,
Yeah.
I was anyway. It was an honor for me to be part of that, and as sort of Haley's political guy. Not that Haley has a political guy, because he is the political guy, but and I ran his campaign. But he called me and wanted help, and said, "Hey, I've asked Jim Barksdale to chair this thing, and I'd like you to run it." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I've got to work for Jim Barksdale, who is like, the greatest CEO of Mississippi origin, and I'm going to be exposed as a fraud that I can't run a 2-car funeral." But anyway, the whole thing was really life changing, and for me, and just the people I met, and having the opportunity to make a difference for the coast was a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I had to me, people ask me about why I do Coast Vue, and once I retired, I was off for about 4 years, and when I had this opportunity to come back, I often say I had forgotten what I learned about what it takes to build a great community. And of course, over the course of over 600 conversations over 2 years of doing Coast Vue, I'm still amazed, though, at what it takes to make a community tick, the kind of leaders it takes, the kind of nonprofit community that it takes. But clearly, in the wake of Katrina, as the publisher of the Sun Herald, I got a great learning about the role that the newspaper and media could play in helping the recovery and informing people in the very strong democracy that we needed, because the communities that were going to emerge in some cases were going to be different than before, and we wanted people to be involved in that process. But I got a chance to understand leadership, and at the I know that as deep as you can possibly imagine. Understand leadership and what it takes to build a great community. And man, we were surrounded by unbelievable leadership, weren't we?
We really were. It was so impressive. He's Uncle Haley to me. But I think Haley and I'm gonna say Marcia too. I mean, they were sort of made for this moment, and in the Lord's providence, they were in leadership in the state, and everything I think that Haley had done in his career in D.C., in Mississippi, it just all sort of built up that this is the guy. And oh, by the way, we've got Trent Lott and Thad Cochran who are going to work hand in hand with you, and a strong House delegation. And Haley is real big on empowering people and having what he likes to call participatory process. And he wanted this recovery commission to be very participatory, and he wanted it to be led by strong folks. And I will say, I remember, Ricky, the first time we met, I came down with Jim Barksdale, and it was about 10 or so days after the storm, and all the mayors were there, and you were there, and I think Anthony Topazzi, was there, another great leader, and I just remember hearing this guy Ricky Mathews talking, and I'm like, man, who is this dude? He can talk, and being an authentic person from the coast. I don't know what you call yourselves down there, Coastians or something. I don't know. but it just it was incredible to witness and to see and to be there in the middle of it, and for those of us that were much less affected by the storm, for us to be able to come in and try to help and to be part of it. And like I said before, it really was an honor, and to have that opportunity. But like you say, leadership was really, really key. And I was amazed, all these mayors and they all really, I mean, they all kind of came together and worked well. I mean, if we look over at what was going on in Louisiana, it was a train wreck. And in Mississippi, we had some tough times and serious challenges, but people really pulled together and tried to figure out, all right, what do we have to do that's immediate? What do we have to do for the long term? And like you said, what do we do here? And what is going on in D.C. and you know, two different tracks going on at the same time.
We're talking to Henry Barbour, who we're going to talk about other things besides Katrina, but he was the executive director for the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal. That's where I got to know him. And we're reflecting on some of the memories of that time. We'll continue that part of the conversation when we come back from break. But then I'm actually interested in understanding a little bit more about where Henry comes from. We'll continue the conversation after this break. Welcome back to Coast Vue. I have Henry Barbour with me today. He's a partner in Capital Resources, but I know him as the former executive director for the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal. And when we went to break, we were just kind of reflecting a bit on Hurricane Katrina. You know, Henry, one of the things that hit me while you were talking is that in my family, 9 of 11 homes were destroyed, and the ones that were left were in need of serious repair. Thank God no one was killed. Thank God. In my newspaper family, 67 of my employees lost everything they owned, every single thing they owned, and some lost family members. When I reflect back on that moment, and I wrote some lessons from that I maybe one day will publish, but one of the lessons was before Katrina, we always thought we worked hard. We didn't know what that really looked like until after Katrina, but to be surrounded by leaders, you know, Anthony DePazzi having to rebuild Mississippi Power and the work that they were doing there and the challenges that they faced, and people like Jerry St. Pé and his work, and Joe Sanderson, you know, had, you know, I if I remember this correctly, big investments in timber, and of course, you know, you know the story of how Katrina affected the entire state of Mississippi. And I mean, I could go on and I name all these names, but they were all challenged personally and professionally, and still taking the time to be a part of this effort without complaint, bro. I mean, not one single complaint. It was like, we got to do this. Failure's not an option. We are not going to let up. That was something to behold, wasn't it?
It really was. It just an amazing group of people, and then you know, just at every level, though, it was so impressive. And I was thinking about Mr. Sanderson, you know, how hard the Pine Belt did get hit. I mean, it was, you know, assume nothing happened on the coast. I mean, the you know, the Harrisburg, Laurel, I mean, they just got so hammered. It was during this process that I got to know Governor Winter. You know, Governor Winter was very involved with the Recovery Commission.
And Ambassador Palmer.
Yes, John Palmer. And I think it's interesting. I can remember a few people when we first came down, we were putting this thing together, they were very skeptical. They were like, you know, they probably looked at me and thought, well, this is a guy who, you know, runs Republican campaigns. I mean, come on. This is going to be political, and Haley Barbour's political, and but it really wasn't. I mean, it wasn't about politics. It was about Mississippi and how do we help our people. And you know, for somebody who, you know, whose house didn't have damage, you know, because I live in Yazoo County, to drive around and see just block after block, and to hear that 67 people at the Sun Herald lost their houses. If I heard you right, I mean,
yes.
That's amazing. And how impressive the Sun Herald was at that time, you know, getting the paper out, and not just like a paper. I mean, like the news. I mean, it was incredible. The whole thing. I before I forget this, I just want to say, those of us that kind of came from up towards Jackson and down working on the Recovery Commission, kind of staff folks, we were down there a lot, and we stayed at the Isle of Capri. And the Isle of Capri was a wreck. And of course, I think it's funny, but we called it the Isle of Debris, and it was something. But for those of us who were coming from a few hours north, just to see it and to be part of it, the charrettes, the planning, the vision. How can the coast be better? And some people took to it more than others, and some plans were scrapped and never happened. But I think it really made a difference, and I'm proud of the work that commission did, and certainly I'm awfully proud of the people of the coast and how they responded.
Well, when you think about the commission work and how it informed what our infrastructure needs are going to be, the battle over the Ocean Springs Bridge, which was no small feat and no small battle. When you think about all these things that played out within the guise of the commission, and then you read Haley's book and understand how that information informed him so that he could make a viable ask in Washington, D.C. Because if we remember correctly, Louisiana asked for like $250 billion without any substantive data to support it, and it created this chilling effect in Washington. And what Haley had to do is work across the aisle. I mean, his bipartisan effort in Washington to say, okay, we get that, but let me tell you what Mississippi is doing. Let me show you, let's validate what our needs or our specific needs are going to be. And the way that he used the information that came from the commission to inform his ability to talk to what happened in Washington, man, it was unbelievable. I mean, you said it was providential that his prior experience in all these realms helped him understand what he was going to need. In a lot of ways, it's interesting. I became publisher of the Times-Picayune in New Orleans. It is interesting that Haley Barbour actually played a role in bringing, I would say sanity, but bringing clarity to what Louisiana was going to need. And by the way, I was over in New Orleans when Haley came to do a book signing. He asked me to come with him. And the leaders from New Orleans that were there to get him to write in their book, and who he was deeply good friends with, he was playing across state lines, man. I mean, it wasn't just. He was a leader for the nation on the Katrina recovery effort, and maybe once in a generation type of leader.
Yeah, and I will say too, I can remember, Haley had to tell some hard truths to the White House at that time, because they needed to hear it, and there was some pushback on quite a few issues, and I'm gonna tell you what, Haley pushed back, and to their credit, they listened.
They did. Yeah. Henry, they listened. People asked, well, when President Bush came to the coast, did you get an opportunity to meet with him? I said, well, which time? Because he came 12 different times. And when you went to a meeting with the president, Haley ran the meeting. And the president had a yellow notepad, and he wrote copious notes. Dude, I mean, it was a working group, man. I mean, they shut the room down, and the people in the room, we had a serious conversation about the recovery effort. And my impression of Bush, I know that there were some struggles initially, there were some perception issues and all that. But what I saw in the true wake of the storm, when we kicked off the commission at the 10 at the factory outlets, up through today, that Bush played a solid role in helping kind of move this along, and that Haley and his partnership was incredibly important.
Yeah. Well, the good thing was they had a relationship, and the president knew Haley was his friend and ally. But that didn't mean that they had to agree on everything, and it didn't mean that Haley had to agree with him, but he would do it privately.
Yeah.
And he would say these things privately. I can remember a moment or two he was, just about ready to not say it privately, but he did. But he hung in there, and he got stuff done. And I can remember hearing from my friend Jim Perry, who was spending a lot of time with Haley in D.C., how they went in to see the speaker at like 1 a.m. in the Capitol. And you can't just do that. That's because Haley's got decades of relationship and understanding, and also he wasn't going to get denied. And of course, I will say, Senator Cochran and Senator Lott deserve all the same credit,
Yeah.
for what they did, because Haley couldn't have done this without Trent Lott, couldn't have done it without Thad Cochran, but also couldn't have done it without the people of the coast.
Yeah.
That was the key.
And listen, I had this wonderful moment after we had the tent meeting with the commission. You talked about his ability to kind of cross the aisle and have a bipartisan push in Washington, but he did the same thing in Mississippi. I remember Billy McCoy putting his arm around me coming out of that tent meeting and just said, anything you need, anything, let me know. And he really meant it, man. I mean, he really meant it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we need to see more of that in our country. But I'm glad that we saw that then. It sadly it gets rarer and rarer. It's interesting too. Haley, he's never been one in campaigns and whatnot where he could show emotion. He tends to talk like a CPA. Wants to talk about all these Medicare numbers or this or that or whatever, and sometimes it seems a little disconnected. Katrina was different. It's the first time I ever saw him give a speech, and I think I saw him at the charrette, and the tears were coming, but there was also laughter, because I can remember he was saying about a French charrette, and he said the only French I know is bourbon and bonbons. Very Haley-esque.
I remember that so well. We're having a conversation with Henry Barbour, looking back on some of the days after Katrina. We'll switch gears here shortly and talk a little bit more about, what is Henry up to these days. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Welcome back to Coast Vue. We have my friend Henry Barbour. Henry was the executive director for the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal, and he's a partner in Capital Resources. We're going to get into some more about what he's up to these days. But before we get too far away from this, we were talking about how President Bush and Haley Barbour had this unique and important relationship during the days after Katrina. It was important for a lot of reasons, but we were in the wake of 9/11. I remember when we met how much security there was around us, but then how focused the president was on understanding the situation, and it was clear they had such a great relationship. But when you watched all that play out, but then in the back of your mind, did it occur to you that here you are, sort of having touch history generationally, because you had worked for George H.W. Bush along the way? Did that occurrence come to your mind that now you've actually worked with father and son?
Yeah, I worked for Daddy Bush, Bush 41 and 88. I worked in his campaign in Mississippi, and then I moved to D.C. and worked for him. Worked at the Department of Energy with something called the White House Liaison, and learned a lot. And one of the things I learned is the Bushes are good people. He was a World War II hero. He's a great American. And to tell you the kind of people they are, the Bushes, I had dear friends that moved to Houston after Bush lost to Clinton, and the wife of my friend, she was the masseuse for George Bush, Barbara Bush, Jim Baker, and he was asking her, hey, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? And she's like, well, it's just we can't get home, so we're just going to be in town. He's like, well, then y'all are coming to our house for Thanksgiving. And so sure enough, they go over to the house, and it's just like, some of the Bush children and them. And I mean, to me, it just speaks volumes about this is the way these people are. And every interaction I had with George W. Bush, exact same thing. You can disagree with him on this or that, whatever, but just really good people, really care about the country and want to do right. And so real privilege, like you say, to get to work for Bush 41 and 43 in different capacities. A real honor for sure.
So you literally were born with politics in your blood, weren't you?
Yeah, my dad was mayor of Yazoo City, and he was elected when he was 27, 1968. I was 4 years old. And so I grew up in a house very involved in politics. That was the first campaign actually Haley ever worked on, was my dad's race. And then that was in the spring. And in the fall, he worked on the Nixon race. So I just grew up around it. I didn't know it. I didn't realize it until I really ran my first campaign. And I was like, oh, I already know how to do all this stuff. I just, it just, and I was, well into my 20s at that point. So, yeah, I grew up in it. And then, of course, end up in D.C. with Haley. And that was in 88 till about 95. And that's when I started to get to know Haley and not Uncle Haley. Which for me was a whole different deal. And we just clicked. And Haley asked me after Bush 41 lost to Bill Clinton, I got a phone call that woke me up the next morning, and Haley was calling, and he said, hey, I'm going to run for RNC chairman. Think you might want to work on my campaign? I'm like, well, yeah, sure. I mean, my job at the RNC is going to be over here in probably a couple months. So, yeah, it sounds like, a good deal. And so anyway, I worked on Haley's race for RNC chairman. Then I worked for him 2 years doing fundraising when he was at the RNC, and really got a much more thorough understanding of Haley Barbour and who he is and what are his talents. And I mean, I learned a lot about him, and I will say about any time occasionally I'll do national media stuff, and I find myself using Haley lines, that I heard in the 80s and 90s. It's like, why try to improve on that? I mean, right. The dude's got game.
But we don't have opportunity to go through it all. But you've had the opportunity to work closely with Governor of Texas, Rick Perry. Along the way, You've worked with Thad Cochran. You've worked on various other campaigns. You've been a real leader in the Mississippi Republican Party. You're now sort of involved at the national level. What actually are you doing these days on the national level as it relates to the Republican Party?
So in 2005, a guy named Mike Retzer was the national committee man, a guy from Greenville who owns 800,000 McDonald's. And Mike became ambassador to Tanzania, and I thought, I'd kind of like to go on the RNC. I've worked at the RNC. I understand it. So anyway, ran for RNC national committee man and got elected in 2005. So I've been on the RNC for almost 17 years, and we have 3 representatives. Jeannie Lucky is the national committee woman, and Frank Bordeaux, 2 folks from the coast, and they are incredibly effective for the National Republican Party. But I'm involved. I worked on something called the Growth and Opportunity Report, which was after the Romney lost to Obama in 2012, and we wrote about how do we grow the party? How do we win the White House? What are the nuts and bolts sorts of things that we need to do to grow the party? Digital, data, field operations, message-wise. How do we talk in a way that it doesn't seem like Republicans just don't like anybody, but like rich white people? And that was a great project to work on, and I think a lot that we did, and I was working hand in hand with a guy named Reince Priebus, who was RNC chairman and later became chief of staff at the White House to President Trump, set the table for Trump to win in 2016. It was sort of ironic because we were sort of the establishment and Trump obviously was not, but he had a very small campaign, and once he became the nominee, unlike, say, a George W. Bush, who had this sort of political background and people he could tap into, Trump didn't. And so Trump basically took the RNC and made it part of his campaign. And so all this work that we had been doing got utilized in a really significant way in electing Trump in 2016. But anyway, so we have, continue to be involved on the RNC. We have a big opportunity. It's a tough political environment right now for Democrats in this national election, and those of us that are on the RNC are trying to keep things focused on what do we need to do to win elections, and let's not get distracted talking about I'll just say other things that just are not helpful and don't unite people. I'm a big believer in you need to unite, not to divide, if you want to win in politics. But anyway, so I'm very involved. Ronna McDaniel is the RNC chair. I visit with her all the time. I'm gonna be with her in Memphis next week for an RNC meeting, and so I'm heavily involved, as are Frank and Jeannie as well.
Well, it's fascinating to see what's happening. And I had Marie Sanderson on recently through some of her efforts have been really trying to understand what's happening in middle America. And I really kind of attached pretty well, at least in terms of my own personal beliefs, to a lot of what she was talking about, which is that a lot of America is center right. And what does that mean? And I have to say that what I have witnessed in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is that too often the polarized ends decide the agenda, or at least if they don't decide the agenda, and I know that the work of the RNC is to sort of help define the agenda, but that the polarized ends too often make that the conversation that we're all too often happening. And, a lot of that has to do with national media. It has to do with the way that the flaws and social media and the way that social media works using advanced artificial intelligence and, kind of convincing people that everybody in their news feed agrees with them, which is really isn't the case, but it gives them a false sense of security about that. But I sort of covet the days, Henry, where we can get back to having conversations that are about solving problems and not about political polarization. Why don't we do this? We're coming to the end of this segment. We'll finish the last segment talking about some of what you're learning about what I just talked about. And my sense is, and I want to know your perspective on it, do you find that a lot of people sort of agree with me that they're conservative, but they wish that the conversation would quit being so darn polarizing? How do we get back in the middle somewhere? And I don't necessarily mean in the middle ideologically, in the middle politically, so we can solve problems. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation with Henry Barbour. I have my friend Henry Barbour, who was the former executive director of the Governor's Commission on Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal for Governor Barbour, somebody I worked very closely with in the wake of Katrina. And he is a partner in Capital Resources. They're super, super involved in political stuff and have been for many, many years. He actually sits on the RNC and is in a really good position, at least on the national scale. He's not as involved in Mississippi politics like he used to be, but I'm sure he could comment about that as well. But when we went to break, I was just talking about sort of how a lot of America is somewhere center right. I mean, not everybody is like off on these edges, and the polarized edges tend to determine the debate too often. What's your thought about that?
Well, my thought is that there's a real hunger, I think, in this country for people who care about solutions. What's the impact that we can have on the American family, on businesses, on innovation, and encouraging education, and things that matter to people, yard and country. We see what's going on in Ukraine, and can't we come together? I mean, my goodness, look what these people are able to do, and all we can do is argue over a handful of issues, and but unfortunately, there are sort of radical forces in both parties. I think the Republicans saw this boil over on January 6th, and Democrats have they've got their own issues, and I think it's hurting them politically this year. But with that said, we need to elect good people. We need good people to run for office. and that's tough, Ricky.
Yeah.
To get that to happen. But I agree with Marie. There is real hunger out there, and people are not satisfied. I mean, look, Biden has only got about 36% job approval, and Biden ran as a guy who was going to be kind of in the middle, but he hadn't governed that way. And on top of that, so often they just come across as incompetent. It's just terrible what happened in Afghanistan, and we don't look like the strong America that I think that we truly are, and we need to get back to that.
So do you think, okay, and clearly, I mean, I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, and if you're watching the situation on the national level with any honesty, it's hard to see an outcome that is different from there being sort of a big time, Republican wave. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I don't think there's much question that Republicans should win the House, and so Nancy Pelosi will no longer be Speaker, thank goodness. Republicans have a tremendous opportunity in the Senate. The map makes it a little bit harder for us. There are 35 seats up in the Senate. 21 of those are held by Republicans, and you got states like Pennsylvania, where Pat Toomey retired, and that's a tougher state for us to win. And then the pickup states where we're supposed to win are Georgia, where I think Herschel Walker's probably going to be our nominee. I mean, we could have Senator Herschel Walker, which is something interesting, but also exciting if you get to know Herschel. We should win in Arizona, but Mark Kelly is an attractive Democrat candidate, and Governor Ducey decided not to run, and it's tough. We should historically the House, the party that's not in control of the White House, typically does well this time, and Biden is just deeply unpopular. Inflation, so many issues that he's not handling. So Republicans have a real opportunity, but what I'm preaching is let's focus on issues and let's focus on bringing people together. If we can focus on those two things, I think we can win elections and also we can govern and get things done.
Clearly inflation always, how policy is affecting me at home is a big issue for people. That is without a doubt a big one. And I think that the gas situation, the whole discussion around energy policy, the average American is getting more of an education around that than they typically would get. They understand it more than they would have understood it before. They're beginning to understand that it's a world market, and how do the dynamics of that work? And then the way that Russia and Ukraine sort of plays into that, people are again, the average person is getting a deeper education about this than they did before. And the other thing is just Ukraine in general. The way this country is being, it's like this Katrina that happens to them every single day, and it doesn't go away. And we can relate to them. They speak our language, and they want. You know what I mean, dude? There's a lot of issues, man. It's a big time issue.
I hope that will come from Ukraine. Hopefully, we're going to stop the Russians and get them back and hold the line on freedom. But I hope too that we'll be inspired by what they're doing. I certainly am.
We will be inspired, and America one day, I hope, will get back in the hands of leaders who can communicate difficult issues and work to solve problems. I know that's what the RNC is focused on. But anyway, Henry, it's been great to visit with you, my friend. I look forward to doing this again.
Thank you, brother.
It's been a real pleasure with Henry Barbour. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.